G'day Dons fans and welcome back to Don the Stat. We're 15 matches into season 2026 and our beloved Dons find ourselves with just a single victory to show for it. A disappointing loss to North Melbourne leaves us at 1-14 with an opportunity to add another W to the column against St Kilda this week, a side that has lost 5 of its last 6 matches. I'm Jonathan Walsh, back behind the microphone after a couple of weeks sunning it up in Europe, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host Ian Hume. Hume, it's good to be back. How's things?
It's great to have you back here, mate. I'm currently freezing my extremities off in this cold weather. Certainly not helping my mood with regards to Essendon with the conditions outside. And to be fair, look, your time away, you haven't missed a whole lot Essendon-wise. The performances are pretty much at the same level since you departed. So fingers crossed your return to the country inspires the boys to put in a bit more and we can start to see some improved performances, because I think all Essendon fans who have been, committed to going to see the team and following them over the last year and a bit probably deserve an improved performance from their side. So he's hoping he can come this week against the Saints. Have you managed to get over your jet lag yet?
Yeah, I think I'm just about over it now, mate. It's particularly brutal when I come home. But I guess their first world problems, it was nice to get away and get some sun and get away from the bubble of footy media and Essendon talk. I did manage to obviously catch the D's game. I watched that at 5 a.m. in Amsterdam. It was I did have to question myself a little bit on what I was doing with life.
Amsterdam's finest wares to maybe get you through some of those games or some of that.
Yeah, I was tempted to go and visit a cafe, that's for sure. But yeah, and then I was home for the North game. But got home very early hours of the morning on Sunday, so wasn't quite fit to get to Marvel. Did catch the game on TV and caught the replay as well. But yeah, keen to obviously get to Marvel this week and get back to see the Bombers live.
Yep, I'll be there as well. And always go with hope that we will be able to perform at a better level. Before we do get into tonight's episode, I do want to once again give a big shout out to Josh Wilson for filling in for you over the last couple of weeks. He's done a fantastic job. He's really growing into it. So it's great to have Josh there as someone who can step in when one of us isn't there. So once again, thank you for that. And I want to say a big thank you to longtime friend of the show, James Lowry. Came to me with a video idea to sort of project forward on some of our less experienced players and where we can see them in 5 years. That was a really fun experience to go through all those players with him and sort of project where we think they will end up. And that video's got a really good response as well. So thanks to James for that.
Yeah, no, Josh did a ripping job, mate. It was actually, I don't listen back to episodes that I'm on. I hate the sound of my own voice, which people might not necessarily believe, but yeah, it was nice to listen to you and Josh. I thought Josh you both did a tremendous job, and I haven't caught the James video yet. I've saved that for the weekend. I'm not planning on doing much this weekend besides going to the footy, so I've saved that one for Saturday to sit down and watch that. I'm looking forward to catching it. Just before we move on to review the loss against North Melbourne, mate, I do want to give a shout out to Bruce, who's a long-time listener and supporter of Don the Stat. Bruce's brother Ross passed away earlier this week after a long battle with illness. So just want to send out our thoughts and condolences to Bruce and the Guthrie family and hope they're doing well during what's, no doubt a really tough time for the family.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, normally getting on to reviewing the game from last week, I normally go into these reviews a few days after a game, a bit more circumspect about a result, whether it's a win or a loss. I think the 3 or 4 days post result tends to sort of flatten the emotions from that game. But, even a few days post that loss to North, I'm still really disappointed with how that played out. I know the margin was only 14 points, but watching the game, it certainly felt like a 10-goal loss. The difference in intensity between the two sides was so big that even Stevie Wonder could have seen it. Still, I don't think Norths are anything special, and they've certainly benefited from a marshmallow soft draw to get to the point they are in the season. But, compared to where we are, they're well beyond where we are based on what we're seeing on field. So even for an internal optimist like me, it certainly is depressing to be consistently living in this Groundhog Day of lackluster performances and loss after loss.
Yeah, it is, mate. It's a strange time that we find ourselves, isn't it? I guess not completely foreign ground, but yeah, besides the late rally in the last quarter, which, was pleasing to see that we didn't completely throw in the towel. It was a tough watch. I thought the Melbourne game was a tough watch as well. And this is on top of what's been a pretty tough 18 months. We got to round 12 last year at 6-4, and, we weren't setting the world on fire. I think probably besides the win over the D's in Gather Round last season, the wins in that patch weren't particularly dominant, but there was a nice win against the Saints. The rally after being to the zip and two to beat Port Adelaide and started slow in that game, challenged late, came home and won. There was some good performances early last year, but to be here, a little over 12 months later. We've had one win since then. We've had a lot of injuries. We've moved on to senior coach. So much talk and conjecture about what that coaching process looks like and who's going to be our next coach. You've obviously got all the talk about Hurdy and the campaign that he's running through his exposure in the media. And then we've got, all the discussion that just comes with being a side that's down the bottom of the ladder. It's tough on the fans, and I'm sure it's really tough on the playing group and the coaches too. I think that the upside, if there is any, is we're starting to get some players back now. Hopefully we stay healthier from here on in. I think it's going to take a little bit of time to reintegrate and build continuity, and that's something that we haven't really had at all in the last couple of years. And hopefully we'll see some better performances off the back of it. It might not mean a lot in terms of wins and losses, but hopefully we're starting to reintegrate some players that just enable us to compete for longer. And if we can do that, then I think that's where the hope for what we might see in the future starts to really filter back into things, and we can go to the footy and start to enjoy it a lot more.
Yeah, I think it's definitely important that we try and finish the season on a strong point, even if it's just one or two matches where, even if they're not wins, even if they're really competitive and there's a spirit and a method to the way the team plays. I think that's, the sort of things that you're looking for in the back end of the season. I've actually been doing video podcasts for most of this year now, for those of you who just listen on audio. And for the first time, we're actually going to try and incorporate some vision, because I think, as you said, when we were doing the planning, what we saw at the first couple of set of bounces sort of really set the tone for the entire game and sort of set out the reason why we were struggling so much. So, yeah, let's give it a go.
Yeah, let's do it. New world of technology. So first set of bounce of the game here, Setterfield gets his hands on the footy first, and he's pretty easily, I guess, brushed aside by Wardlaw, who's then really, really clean. Whilst he's falling to the ground, he's able to pick it up. North goes forward, and we sort of watch this as it rolls through. And the ball really is camped in their forward half, isn't it? So they didn't score directly from the first two centre bounces, but it just meant that we were on the back foot straight away. And we had an opportunity there, if Setters was cleaner, for the ball to go the other way and for us to start with ascendancy and start with territory. And then if we cut to the second one, Hume, if we can load that up, it's almost mix and repeat, but this time it's Duz who fumbles one, and then again you watch the difference of the way Wardlaw comes through, how clean he is, and it's not a great kick by any stretch, but gets territory, and then they read it first and get a shot at goal, which they miss. But yeah, I just felt that for a team that Dean Solomon, since he's been coach, has been talking a lot about contest. In fact, Brad Scott was talking a lot about it as well. We had the opportunity for the start of the game to look a little bit different if we were just a bit cleaner there in those first two centre bounces, and we missed that opportunity.
You're right. And I think further the disappointment from those two centre bounces is that, there was clearly a setup with the way in which the ruck and the midfielder were communicating, because Brian wins both of those taps and gets them to where he wants and gets them to a position where we've got first hands on the ball. And because we're not clean enough in that situation, that we lose the opportunity to take advantage of, what we thought could have been, a significant advantage for us, given that Sherry was out and we had a recognised ruckman, Nick Bryan, and they were sort of running with, second string ruckman. And so, as you could see from those clips, the ruck part of it worked, and we just couldn't follow up once that part of the game went past. And that sort of flowed on to how the rest of the game played out, because when we were struggling in the clearance, that is when we were struggling in games. And it's been a real consistent pattern for us over this season, is that once we're out of it in clearance, we really struggle to find any other ways to get into the game. So, as you said, North weren't exactly always scoring directly from their clearance, but it was giving them the territory they needed to keep us locked up in our back half. So, if you look in quarter one, they won 8 clearances to 4. That resulted in 17 inside 50s to 8. Whilst in the third quarter, it was 9 clearances to 4, and that resulted in 14-5 inside 50. So across those 2 quarters in the game, it was 18 shots to 4. So in the other 2 quarters, when we matched them at clearance, the scoring shots were essentially even. But again, once we fell apart in clearance within the game, we really struggled. As I said, we have no other way of competing in game unless we're winning clearance at this stage.
Yeah, look, I think other than the very, very best teams, I think most teams struggle where they're unable to get clearance and contest ascendancy, because it's such a key part of being able to then control what happens on the outside. You're constantly under pressure if you're giving up contest and clearance. And I think the reason that I come back to that first quarter and those first 2 centre bounces is because we had an opportunity to start the game with momentum and with territory, and we effectively handed it back. And yeah, I think we just need to keep finding ways to get it right. But it also identifies or just highlights you and I have talked about small moments a lot. So you get to an end of a game like that and you feel really disappointed and disheartened and disillusioned, as you were mentioning earlier, Hume. But it's not miles apart. We're a couple of fumbles away from getting the first 2 centre clearances of the game and ideally setting ourselves up in a position to score from those. And then the whole outlook of the game can look very different. And there's, we've picked 2 there. There's 15, 20 of those throughout a game that you just hope that in time when this team's had a little bit more continuity, is playing with more confidence, because that's the other thing that's missing is confidence at the moment. You've got a guy like Setterfield who's playing for his next contract and hoping to stay on the list. You got Duz, who's probably feeling the burden of having to carry a lot of load at the moment, both mentally and physically. Our best footy at the moment is probably off the back of when he's playing really well. So, that can be quite a burden to him. So, I think that what you hope is that in time, 20 missed moments or 20 poor moments in a game of footy comes down to 15, comes down to 12, comes down to 8, comes down to 5. And when it's down at around that level, you start to become really, really competitive.
Yeah, right. It's certainly something we've spoken about, that, a game is a collection of moments, and it's whichever team handles those moments better ultimately results in winning the game. And too often we're on the wrong side of those moments. And even then, in this game, when we did manage to get it forward and have some opportunity, we were constantly giving the ball back to the Kangaroos, and then we weren't able to win it back ourselves. So you could see the ground that once the Kangaroos had the ball back, they were pretty much able to transition without much of any pressure and get it inside their 50. So across the game, we only won 47 intercepts, which is our lowest this year. It's lower than any game at the very least since 2023. It's come about because of the combination of lack of continuity between players. There's lack of care from certain individuals in the side in their defensive aspects. There's the malaise that's built up after only 1 win from 30 games. And there's a change in coaching, so there's different messaging. There's been some pretty, rough highlights, or quote unquote highlights, that's been shown on some of the footy shows of some of the really poor defensive structures and defensive efforts over this past week. And look, I think we've spoken about this for quite a long time, and whoever is the next coach probably needs to make this aspect of the game a priority, because until this is fixed, we won't ever be a premiership competitor. And if that means that certain players who refuse to prove in this area have to be let go, then so be it.
Yeah, they scored 22 points from change that started in their defensive 50, but it could have been a lot worse. It was 2 goals to 10, and they kicked 1 goal 7 from turnovers where they won the ball back in defensive 50. So, yeah, that scoreboard could have looked really, really ugly if they had made the most of their chances. They kicked another 4-3 from turnovers in the defensive half of centre. On average, teams transition from defensive 50 to forward 50 23.7% of the time. We're ranked 18th. Teams transition coast to coast 31% of the time against us. North did it 42.4% of the time in that game, which is going almost twice better than the AFL average. So yeah, it wasn't a good outcome at all. It was sloppy and disorganised. Again, I think largely at times caused by where and how we were turning the ball over, not just a lack of being able to defend, but us turning it over in dangerous positions. So, there's never one solution to this. It's a holistic solution that we need to get better in lots of areas. But yeah, that's certainly a part of a game that when we're not playing well and things aren't going our way, that falls apart really, really quickly. And it was evident against the Roos.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing that stood out since Solomon's come in these last couple of weeks in particular has been the positional changes that the coaching staff has been trying. It's an interesting debate as to whether they're doing it because they think it'll lead to better outcomes for the current side or whether they're getting a look at all possibilities for what certain players can do. You know, the obvious one that it started with was Ben Mackay as a forward, a little bit in the ruck, but mainly as a forward these last couple of weeks. But it certainly expanded in the last couple of games. What are the moves that you've seen that stand out to you, and what's your assessment on how successful they're likely to be?
Yeah, I'm not sure I like any of them, to be honest with you, mate. I think at a time where I mean, the messaging from Solly is pretty clear that we're focused on two things fundamentally: contest and team defence. So we've really, my take on that is we've really stripped things back to focus on those things and really just get the basic fundamentals right. So I don't quite understand why we've had so much positional change going on, particularly given it's been unforced. You know, this isn't like last year where we didn't have any key defenders and we had to play Blackiston, who we just drafted as a ruckman at centre half back. These are decisions where most part we've had other options. Ben Mackay playing forward, I sort of understood that initially. We dropped him, we brought him back, took some pressure off and played him forward. And he's been okay. Like we've seen him hit the scoreboard and done some okay things. But, I don't think anyone's envisaging that he's the long-term solution to partner Nate Caddy up forward. I think if anything, it's going to be Peter Wright in the next little while and until Archer May and someone else develop into those roles. But so I don't understand why we wouldn't have over the last month had an opportunity to really keep building games into Mackay and Reid and getting them to learn how to play with one another. We saw Caldwell play mostly at half forward until the last quarter. He was tagging Caleb Daniel in the first quarter. We've seen Jai play at half forward time and time again over his career at Essendon. He does get lost in that position. He's reactive when it comes to the ball switching from being in possession to the opposition having it, and he has to go to defend. He really seems to struggle with that. So I don't quite understand why we tried that again. I mean, I've said this before, but I've never liked the idea of Zach Merritt at halfback. He doesn't run and carry, which you can get away with if you have some depth to your kicking. Zach doesn't have that either. So he doesn't really have the tools to be an effective halfback. What he does have the tools to is to set you up in the forward half. So I haven't been a fan of that. What has surprised me about Zach, I will say though, is I thought his one-on-one defending is a lot better than I expected. And in fact, he's done quite well in that area. So I credit him there. But in terms of being able to impact games of football, I think we've seen it. We've seen it previously. It hadn't worked. I don't know why we're stuck with it as long as we have. We've changed Blackiston and how we've used him as well, which I like. More to the point, I haven't liked that we've asked him to play key back and rotate through the ruck. I think that's asking a lot of a guy. So the last couple of weeks he's been rotating forward or bench when he's not been in the ruck. And I guess given that he's had such low time on ground, could we have been playing, a Cox in that ruck forward role instead and then Mackay going back and that might have allowed us to get an extra running player or small forward into the team. So, yeah, Jones back, didn't like it. Yeah, I thought he looked quite lost. I don't know what that looked like to you, Hume, at the ground. You would have had a better look at it to me. But I'm not sure any of those positional moves have been ones that have stood out as something that we've gained from long term. So I really hope we revert to effectively what we did in the last quarter, and that was, with the exception of Zach Reid, who went forward, everyone just moved back to their best positions.
Yeah. Again, look, just to sort of wrap up on the North game, we're not dealing with a whole lot of positives in a game like this. And I want to stress that I wrote this piece before the selection because this is going to sound a bit shallow, what I'm going to say a bit later. But one thing I really liked was the way Hussein Alashka performed. He's never going to be a high possession player. So when he gets these opportunities, Nielsen nailed them, and he did that on the weekend. So that snap around the body from the boundary line never looked like missing. And look, as good as the goals were, I think the thing that most impressed me was his decision-making that resulted in the Durham goal in the first quarter. So, he has to collect the ball on the boundary, and it's this position where you're really looking to center the ball. And most other players in that situation, that tight on the boundary, would have kicked it high in the air. went centering the ball, which would have given the defenders an easier chance to either mark or to kill the ball. But by going along the ground, he created chaos we were able to capitalise on. I know that Kako had a little impact on the game coming back from injury, but seeing that from him and a little taste of Huss in this game show that you probably have got a potentially dangerous small forward combo, which is something we've lacked for years, and apparently we're going to lack this week in this game as well.
Yeah, he kind of was us by putting this on the running sheet, mate. But he's had 9 shots and kicked 5-2 in his 3 games back. I'm not sure what more you can ask for a small forward who's playing pretty deep and in a team that has averaged just 43 inside 50s at that time. Yeah, he's absolutely made the most of very limited opportunities. I liked he took the responsibility for that set shot as well and from the boundary and nailed it. So, yeah, there's a player there. We've had some small forwards that have come in and shown some different things around, defensive application, being able to tackle and pressure. But what we haven't had for a long time, probably almost since Darren Buick, was a small forward that nails their opportunities when they get them around goals. And that's what Huss is. He's not the finished product yet, but yeah, he's got some tools in his kit bag that we've been crying out for. And I think there's a player there.
Yeah, I agree. And hopefully he'll find his way back into the side soon. Well, moving on now to the news of the week, and we do have another Damian Barrett Award nomination. And this one comes from the man himself, who's earned himself his 2nd nomination of the year with his call in his sliding doors column that the club should consider Matthew Lloyd as coach due to his work at Haileybury coaching school footy. The reason why I'm nominating this take is not in of itself as a take, but what it really demonstrated to me was the manufactured nay of a lot of today's footy media. So you have one journalist comes up with a fantastical scenario based on almost nothing. He so happens to work with the person in question. So in his next media gig, he gets to ask that person about the thing he made up, and then there's a clarification from the person who the article's about, in this case Matthew Lloyd, and that results in more conversation. So well done, Damian. You've created 3 or 4 days of talk based on absolutely nothing. You wouldn't think that there was actually anything interesting on field to talk about, given the way this constantly happens. So yeah, Damian, that's your 2nd nomination for the year.
Yeah, it's really the way the footy media works, doesn't it? That made up story by a journalist on one of the platforms that they're on, and in this case, it's the AFL's very own website, where I really don't understand why the AFL allows or has a vehicle for this sort of sensationalist kind of drama fabrication that gets published on their very own website, but then it gets rehashed across the rest of TV, print, radio, and nothing story, because, as you said, becomes 3 or 4 days worth of content. It's pretty ridiculous, and no wonder so many people are fed up with it and turning to platforms like ours and many of the other sort of fan creator content that's out there.
Yeah, it's a bit like the other one that's really frustrated me is the whole Solomon is Welsh's preferred candidate from some anonymous source that's apparently close to Andrew Welsh. That could be Andrew Welsh's barber for all we know. But you say, someone says it and that's, driven, 2 or 3 weeks of conversation as well, again, based on essentially nothing. But yeah, you're right. That's the world we live in. But I guess, timing's everything. And I expected to go into last week's preview being able to talk about the coaching search, and it will be announced. And it wasn't by the time of record last week, but literally under 24 hours after we recorded that, the club finally did release its plans for the upcoming coach search. It's going to be an internal panel made up of board members Andrew Welsh, Anthony DiPietro, Tim Roberts, Ted Richards, and Caroline Monson. So there are no specific criteria listed for the coaching role, which does suggest to me that they're going into this with an open mind, which I think is the right call. I think if you go in thinking we need an experienced coach, or we need to get a fresh coach, I think you lock yourself off to a lot of potential opportunities, because I think, as we've talked about on this show a couple of times now, we've sort of gone through all the different gears and types of styles of coaches to bring in, the experienced coach or the new coach, the favourite son. We've tried everything and none of it has worked to this point. So I think going in with as much of an open mind as possible. So there has been some criticism that it's an all internal panel, but DiPietro with his experience at Melbourne Victory, Ted Richards with his Sons history means that you are getting viewpoints of people who have been recently outside of Essendon. So I don't think it's as much of a problem as it may feel at a cursory glance. And Also, given they've kept it internal, they have put their credibility on the line with this decision rather than getting an external board to make a recommendation. So their board positions are probably dependent on how their eventual choice goes. I guess, what are your thoughts with regards to the panel and how we seem to be going about the process, Jono?
Yeah, I just want to clarify one point you made there, Hume. Or not clear up, because you said it pretty quickly. It's Caroline Monson, not Caroline Wilson. So just make sure that came across.
I'm pretty sure I said Monson. I don't think I said Wilson.
No, you did, but you said it. You said it quite quickly. So I just guess people who might be listening to this on 2 times speed, listening to that even faster, might have just done a bit of a double take. So just in case someone misheard.
There's been about 50 emergency calls made for heart attacks for people listening to this.
So yeah, Caroline's the executive GM of HR, or people and culture at the football club. So yeah, look, I think to be serious for a moment, I don't think either approach, whether you go internal or external, is a silver bullet to success across all clubs and appointments to date. There's been examples where both have worked and where both have failed. And I think no matter which approach we went down, there would have been aspects of the fan base who were unhappy with it. You can't please all the people all the time. And that's just the world that we operate in, I guess. And ultimately hindsight judges, whether this is the right approach or not, doesn't it? I think I don't have a strong view on what's the right way and what's the wrong way. I understand why Dave Barham led the external search last time, given he didn't feel like he had the football experience and football knowledge to be able to chair that decision. One thing that I do know about Andrew Walsh and where I do have a strong view is that he's someone who has confidence in his football knowledge, but also has confidence in the areas where he's not too strong and where he needs help and needs to seek either outside or inside counsel. And I think I'm confident that he's really committed to the strategy that the club has outlined around its list and how we're building that through the draft, leveraging free agency where we can bring in experience. But I think the decision, I think, is strong enough to make decisions for what he and his board believe to be for the betterment of the Essendon Football Club and not be swayed by outside noise. So I think his leadership is really important and sounds obvious, but he's really important in this decision, and I like that he's backed himself in. I think his ability to do that is what got the best out of himself as a player. His ability to do that is what set him up as a successful businessman, and I think it's what will ultimately set him up to be part of this next evolution of our football club. And the other part to this, and I've said this before on the Q&A a couple of weeks ago, is I think Ted Richards plays a really, really important role in all of this, not just because of his experience at the Swans, but also because he's someone who's quite thoughtful, considered and balanced in the way that he operates. And I have tremendous comfort in his capabilities to support this process effectively. So, yeah, what will be. And ultimately hindsight will be the judge of whether we've made the right decision and run the right process. But I do have real confidence in Andrew and Ted to help steer us through this process effectively.
Yeah. It's not something we're going to have an answer to for at least 3 or 4 years, is it? So, yeah, I guess we just have to sort of see what happens with this, and game history will be the judge of how things play out. But moving on, it also seems that we've taken more concrete steps in seeking an assistance package from the AFL, with Walsh and Roberts presenting to the AFL as to why we should receive such assistance. It certainly doesn't seem like it's a fait accompli, yet they will get it. But if we do, it sounds like it's likely will be similar to what West Coast got, with an end of first round pick and extra rookie spots. Wasn't mentioned in any of the reports, but I do hope they've explored the ability to pre-list some NGA talent. It certainly can't hurt to ask, given we do have a fair crop coming through in the next couple of years. And look, I guess it's a bit of a shame that Sam Draper isn't leaving as a free agent this year as opposed to last, as if he was, I'm sure the AFL with their secret herbs and spices would have been able to massage a way to get us a selection after our first pick in the draft, sort of how they handled West Coast and Oscar Allen last year. But that's just where we're at the moment.
Yeah, look, that end of first round pick will certainly be useful. I think what's important in it being end of first round is that it comes in before the additional compensation picks that will be given to the clubs in the bottom 5 whose pick is compromised by any bids, which will be almost certainly one of those. So yeah, I think that'll be useful. People I've started talking to who are pretty close to this draft, sort of starting to think that the depth in this draft is starting to really show, and that it's not too dissimilar, at least in the top end, to what we saw in the 2024 national draft. So maybe doesn't quite go as deep then, but the evenness of the first sort of 30 to 40 is quite strong. Those extra rookie picks quite interest me though, mate. I think the ability to add some mature role players from state leagues, you can almost take a little bit of a punt on some guys that you think might be able to come in and play some specified roles and play it sooner rather than later. So, where we think we've got real need for particular types of players, we can use those picks to really drill down on that and bring some mature guys in to really help the next stage of our rebuild. So, yeah, you don't like the fact that you have to ask, but we have, and let's hope we can be effective with what comes.
Yeah. As an aside, so I guess projecting forward to the national draft, if we did get that package and we sit roughly where we are, I don't think at this stage, based on what we've done, we can get out of the bottom two, and then probably a lot depends on how Richmond go for the rest of the year as well. But we're probably looking at something like pick one or two before bids, pick 19, which is the assistant pick from the AFL, pick 20, which is our natural second rounder, and then pick 21 from bidding on a Walker and a Cochrane and being pushed back in the national draft. And that's before what happens with Merritt Ridley at all. It is going to leave us with a lot of room to maneuver. And I think the fact that Tassie's coming in the following year and it's going to have a big impact on the draft pool for next year's draft, those sort of picks around 20, I think there's going to be teams that are going to be considering their 2027 first round picks for those picks because of the fact that Tasmania is going to pre-list players and take them out of the draft pool. They're going to have, I think it's 10 or so of the first 20, 25 picks in that draft. And so the value of picks in that draft are going to be lesser. So there's probably teams who are going to be wanting to bid, what could be high level first round picks in a normal draft in 2027 for those players around the 20, which could then help us in terms of bid matching for players like Buick and Mustafa Darwish, who does seem to be coming quite quickly and rocketing up draft boards as well. So, yeah, I think with all that in mind, it is going to give us a lot of room to maneuver for our list build over the next couple of years.
Yeah, that's right. So we're going to end up with 4 picks in the top 25, give or take, and then likely that ends up being 5 with a merit trade, doesn't it? And because I would expect that we would get 1 this year and 1 or something, some sort of package for next year. But yeah, 5 picks in the top 25 in a draft that's shaping up pretty good. And then, 2, NGA and a father-son to get access to them next year when getting access to best talent is going to be really hard. And you add that to what we've done in the last 3 drafts, then that puts us in a really great position in terms of depth of young talent. We need to get those picks right, or the bulk of them right, of course, but I think we can have some confidence in Matt Rosa and his team on what he's done so far. That really excites me. And if we can then sell that dream to some experienced players to come along for the ride and help mentor that group, we nail the coaching decision, then as tough as things might be right now, that tide could start to turn, really, really quickly. And hopefully we're sitting here in, another 12 to 24 months talking about a much more successful and exciting team to go to watch from a week-to-week basis.
Yeah, indeed. Now, there's certainly plenty of trade rumours flying around at this time of year. We're not going to go through all of them, as a lot of them are recycled. There's been talk of Jed Walter and Lockie Neal this last week, and I think we've spoken about those on the show before, and we might speak about them in the coming weeks again. But a new one from Josh Gabelich on Gettable this week was that we were having discussions with Jack Bowers from Geelong, who struggled to get a game this year. He's 28, which if players like Barrett, Parrish, Ridley all leave, we will be crying out for players in that age demographic. I'm pretty sure we were interested when he left Gold Coast, although that may have had as much to do with the pick 7 that was coming with him. Do you think he's the sort of player we should be approaching at this stage of our list build?
If I remember correctly, he was an Essendon supporter growing up, and Adrian Jadoro presented him a jumper with number 5 on the back as part of the pitch. So number 5 was available. We hadn't drafted Elijah Sardis at that stage. So I'm pretty sure that was the pitch. I've not tracked him all that closely whilst he's been at the Cats. I know he was highly valued for his leadership at an underage level. He's a tall mid. He's got some good skills. He's not really an inside nor an outside, so he's a bit of a hybrid, sort of a mid. I know He's been in and out this year. He's played most games in the previous couple of years, but even then battled for consistency at the kids. I can see why we'd have some level of interest, and I think we should be looking at all options and talking to lots of people and seeing what happens. But given we have Sharp and Roby already there, Farrow will move into the midfield mix at some point. We've got Nick Martin coming back. We'd expect Blake Justice to be on the list next year. We're pretty well stocked all of a sudden from going from a midfield that was, I guess the shortest and spoken about for lacking height and size, where we're very quickly going to sort of build a midfield group that's got lots of options around that sort of 187, 188 through to 190 plus mark. So I'm not sure the type is someone that really interests given what we're coming through in some young talent there.
Yeah. And then before we do move on to the Saints, I did ask this of Josh last week, so I will ask you today. What are the 5 things you want to see from Essendon in the last part of the season, outside of winning games? Obviously, I think that's a given, isn't it? Or winning at least one game.
Yeah,
one game.
I mean, it would be nice to celebrate and hear the song at the end of the game, a couple more times this year. Spoiler alert ahead of selection, although we've hinted towards it already. We're not going to see one of them, and that was a focus on getting more ground level players in the forward half. I don't know if I have a list of 5, mate, to be honest. I'd like to see some continuity. I'd like to see that in all parts of the ground. I've spoken about it a little bit in terms of reverting back to natural positions, Reid and Mackay playing together, especially if Ridley is going to go. I really do think, you don't want to go into round 1 next year with, I would expect Reid and Mackay playing down back, and we've missed half a season's opportunity to get them playing together. Ridley not there, and then Mackay having to reintroduce himself to his key defensive partner doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I'd like to see a bit more of some of the guys that we have to make list decisions on. So Sardar Hooley, he's a good example of that. We've seen improvement from him down back. He went out injured, and then he's come back and sort of played a little bit all over the place. I'd like to see him settle down in the back 6 and see if he can help us defensively, but also improve how we move the footy. I'd like to see Nick Cox play as a forward and do some ruck work. I'd like to see Jerian debut at some stage. I know he's got a bit of an injury at the moment. I'm looking forward to seeing Angus Clark back into the side. I hope we can get another half a dozen or so games out of him on the opposite wing to Xavier Dersma and see what that pairing can help us do both with and without the footy. I'm really comfortable and pleased to hear that we're going to continue to focus on the contest. We've been talking about that for a long time, and certainly as long as we've been doing this podcast, I think that's the right way, because it gives you the opportunity to then control what happens on the outside. So they're the main ones that come to mind for me, mate. Shall we move on and take a look at the Saints?
Yes, let's do so. And given it's the first time we're playing the Saints, we'll do the full breakdown of them. Last season, Saints finished in 12th position with 9 wins and a percentage of 88.5%. This season, the Saints are sitting in 13th position with 6 wins and a percentage of 100, with their wins coming against the Giants twice, Port, Eagles, Carlton and Richmond.
Yeah, I mentioned it in the intro. Their form certainly tapered. They were 5 from 5 to start the season, but in their 5 matches since, they've only won 1 of those. That was an 8-point win over the Giants at Marvel, so not exactly a groundbreaking victory. Should be noted, though, they've lost to some good sides. So their losses in the last 5 weeks have been to Fremantle, Hawthorn, Sydney and the Western Bulldogs, so haven't necessarily had an easy run of it.
Yeah, indeed. There have been some improvements from the Saints. They have increased their scoring from 80 to 88 points per game, and their scores against have dropped slightly from 90 to 88, which explains their percentage of exactly 100. They've improved their territory balance. They have increased the inside 50s by 4 per game to 52, although they are giving up 1 more inside 50 per game this year, up to 52.5. But they are one of the most efficient sides when they enter their forward 50. They're ranked 3rd with 53% of scores per inside 50. That said, the defence has also become leakier. They're being scored against on 53% of entries, up from 51. So there's a bit of, they've loosened themselves up a bit to be able to score more, and that's paying off, but it is hurting them a little bit the other way, and that helps explain why they are where they're at. They have bucked the trend of the AFL a little bit, that they're ranked 4th for kick to handball. The handball ratio of 1.47 is a little bit down on last year, but not as much as some teams have really committed to the handball movement.
Yeah, they're just below AFL average for inside 50s. They're ranked 10th in the AFL, so they're scoring from what they are getting, but they're not getting a lot of them. It is clearance where they're scoring from. They average 35 points a game from stoppage and centre clearance combined. ranked 8th in the AFL. They averaged 48 points a game from turnover, ranked 12th.
Yeah, you talk about clearance there, and a lot of that's not necessarily coming from the centre bounce or at least the territory aspect, because they've got an average differential this year of minus 1.17 per game, which is one of the poorer of the league. However, when they are winning it, they're actually really successful in scoring from it. They're fourth in scoring from centre bounce, averaging 15 points a game from this source. Also been a strong side in the stoppage clearances, averaging 2.7 more stoppage clearances than their opponents. They are mid-table at scores for and against from boundary throw-ins, but they are the best at defending oppositions at ball up. So they concede less than a goal a game from this source. They rank second in contested possession differential with 6 more than their opponents per game. However, their ground ball game has fallen away. They're actually the best in the comp in terms of ground ball gets differential last year. They've dropped all the way to 9th, where they're only breaking even in ground ball wins.
Yeah, I think by and large, most of their key metrics kind of reflect their ladder position, right? That nothing they're doing is dramatically poor, but nothing to really hang their hat on either. I know Rick Edwards shared some insight on his Patreon channel today. There's a real focus on ball movement, speed of ball movement at training today. The Saints concede the second most intercept marks in the AFL this season and the fourth most points against on turnover. So I'd have to think that's an area that we think we might be able to exploit them if we can get some heat on the footy. What we do know about the Saints is if that you're slow with the ball, they will press up and squeeze you, and they're really well drilled in that regard. So, yeah, I think that's probably the one area where if we get things right, we might be able to expose them. But yeah, they made quite a few list changes, a well documented and spoken about approach in this offseason. Nate, do you want to take them through that quickly?
Yeah, you're right. They were the big story of the 2025 off-season. They were splashing cash like a Saudi Arabian oil baron. They did have to clear out some players to bring their new acquisitions in, though. So former captain Jack Steele was traded to Melbourne. He played 21 games last year. He was joined at Melbourne by Max Heath, who played 4. Jimmy Webster retired after 15 games, whilst 5 others were delisted, including Zach Jones, who played 15, Ari Schoenmaker, who played 3, and then Harry Boyd, Zane Cordy, and Angus McLennan, all of whom played 1 game last year. Saints cash splash saw them attract Tonda Conning and Jack Silvani from Carlton as free agents. Both had played all 15 games this year up until the last game, although De Conning is now out injured. Sam Flanders was brought in from Gold Coast. He also managed 12 games before getting injured, whilst Liam Ryan came from West Coast and has played 10 games. He's been in and out of the side with injury as well. Saints first pick, number 42, Charlie Banfield. He's played 3 games so far this year. Whilst pick 52, Kai Fincher, and Cat B rookie Kobe McDonald are yet to debut.
Yeah, and on that, mate, they'll be without De Koning and Flanders this week. Flanders is out for the season. We will see Silvani and Liam Ryan, though. Both names that we've seen pretty regularly over the years against Essendon, albeit they'll be in different jumpers this week. Speaking of this week, let's have a look at selection. We're playing on Sunday, of course, so it's extended squads. Peter Wright's been named. He's expected to be back this week from his knee injury, which is good news, whether that's AFL or VFL yet to be seen. Kondo Giardis back in the squad, Nick Cox in the squad, and Sardar Hooley. One out at this stage. It is an omission. Hussein Al-Ashkar is out, which I find quite hard to get my head around. What do you make of this, mate?
Yeah, I don't tend to get angry about selection all that much, but this really infuriated me. We've been going on about our need for more ground ball level threats in the side for months now. We finally played 2 in Kako and Al-Ashkar, and we only last 1 week before dropping one of them in Huss. Yeah, as we spoke about earlier, I think we just need those ground ball threats. We need players who can find the goals, and he's been able to do that. Obviously, Isaac last week was certainly not at his peak level of form coming back from his injury. So the fact that we're essentially going in with an underprepared Isaac Kako as our one main small forward certainly does confound me. You mentioned there with Peter Wright, and he's been named on the field. That would suggest he's straight back in. With TDK out for St Kilda, this should give us the ability to work over Rowan Marshall with Wright in partnership with Nick Bryan. I would expect that probably means that Blackiston will make way here, especially if Jones is going to be playing back. You probably run Jones, Reid, and Ridley as your keys. If you're going to play Jones back, and then you've got Pryor and Redmond who can play up and down there as well in terms of height. And as we're going to talk about in match tactics, if we do what worked last year and send Andy McGrath to Messiah, that could mean there a way back for Sardar Hooley to play small in the back line as well. So, yeah, that's how I potentially see it playing out. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, Ben Mackay finished the game down back, so I hope we see him back down there this week with Reid and Ridley. I hope this also means we see Zach Merritt in the forward half and Al Hawley in the back half. I know Huss has some work to do in his fitness and on his defensive game, but we knew that when we selected him. So if it was he wasn't really doing that at VFL level. So to expect someone to come into AFL level and do something they're not doing there, seems counterintuitive. But he has been hitting the scoreboard. So yeah, I'm not really sure why we moved on so quickly. You look at the two teams; they got Ward Higgins, Ryan Butler, Campbell Lake if he holds his spot. So, 4-5 small forward options with a couple of mids that can rotate through half forward as well. We're going with Kako and maybe Zach Merritt, two very different approaches. Saints are 8th in the AFL for forward 50 ground balls. We're 17th. And it's pretty easy to see why we're 17th. I mean, we're not getting a high number of inside 50s, but St Kilda aren't getting a heap either. But we're just not picking players that are capable of doing it. And we've just admitted the guy who averages our most forward 50 ground balls this year.
Yeah. On to the Saints and the game with the extended bench. They've got 5 players who've been named in with 2 out injured in Sinclair and Tom DeConning. They're going to be selecting from an extended bench, which includes Travalia, Philippou, Dodson, O'Connell, Liam Henry. If I look at the names that are out for the Saints, so they are big outs for the Saints. Obviously, DeConning has become their number one, given his pay packet, and Jack Sinclair has been a really good performer for them over a long period of time off halfback. I think on paper, you'd probably expect to see Dodson come in for TDK as ruck support and Henry in for Sinclair as halfback run, but you have to see how that plays out there when we find out the final teams tomorrow afternoon.
Yeah, I kind of would have liked to have seen how Brian equips himself against TDK, so it's a little bit of a shame that he's not there. And in many ways, Rowan Marshall could be a more challenging opponent for him, at least in physicality. So, yeah, that was a matchup I was kind of looking forward to. I think TDK is almost the ruckman at AFL level that Nick Bryan is probably the most like. So, yeah, it would have been an interesting matchup. But, yeah, let's have a look at how the Saints went last time out, mate. They had a bye last round, so we're rewinding a couple of weeks now.
Yeah, indeed. And as you said, they've had a couple of games. They've had a few losses in the last few weeks, and this game before the bye was no exception, where they went down 61-81 to the Western Bulldogs. And the first half of that game was pretty close until just before the break, with the Dogs kicking a couple of late goals to gain a 16-point lead at the change. And it was an even third quarter, after which there was 3 straight goals to the Dogs at the beginning of the fourth, and that pretty much proved too much for the Saints, ultimately seeing them go down by 20 points.
Yeah, the Blues under Michael Voss became a bit of a meme for their second half fade-outs, prior to him being removed as coach. But the Saints are pretty guilty of that this season too. They're the best first quarter team in the competition. They won 13 of 15, but they've won just 5 of 15 second halves. So they are starting games hot and fading late. So that game against the Dogs kind of went to how most of their season has gone.
Yeah. In terms of the team stats, the Saints did have much more of the ball than the Dogs, over 40 more possessions, and that resulted in 16 more inside 50s for them. But unlike most of this season, where they've actually been pretty effective at scoring when they go inside 50, they only scored on 44% of their inside 50s. Whereas the other way, they were really leaky. Once the Dogs went inside, the Dogs scored every 58% of their forward 50 entries. And ultimately, that was the big difference in the end of the game, was the Dogs were just that much more efficient when they went forward.
Yeah, the Saints won inside 50s by 16, contested possessions by 19. They're the only side to lose a game this season when winning those metrics by that much or more. So, it was a game that on paper at least, or on key metrics that the Saints should have won, but they weren't able to get across the line.
Yeah, seeing numbers like that reminds me of some Essendon games of some of the past couple of years, where we've had all that territory and winning contests and haven't been able to take advantage of it. As for the individual Saints players, Nsai was the dominant Saint ball winner. He had 44 possessions to go over 900 metres gained. Bradley Hill with 37, Hugo Garcia with 36 and 8 clearances, and Marcus Windhager with 35 and 5 also had quite a lot of the ball. In terms of their goal scorers, all 8 of the Saints' goals came from different goal kickers. So it does give us a bit to ponder as we do head into this week's match. And I think back to the Saints game that we played at the end of, or the back end of last year, it was the game that Zach missed, and Andy took the captaincy in that back end of the season. It was one of our better performances post Dreamtime. We were right there with a chance to win. I think Redmond had a shot just on the siren or just before the siren, which went wide, which would, if it had gone straight, would have resulted in us winning a game. My biggest memory of that clash was how informed the sire was at that back end of the season. And this was after that Melbourne game where he had such an extraordinary impact on that result. And I think across the back half of last year. The role Andy did on Nasiah was probably the best any player in that part of the season did on him in terms of quelling his influence. So Nasiah, we talked about him having quite a lot of the ball last week for the Saints. He wasn't hugely effective in terms of scoreboard impact from that. So he hasn't quite had as big an impact this season as he was having at the back end of last season, but he still is the Saints' most dangerous player. So from this, do you go back to the well there with McGrath following Nasiah around, kind of like he did with Cosy Pickett over in Gather Round? Even that means we do have to play Andy McGrath in the midfield.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what the Saints do with Nasiah this week. He had a couple of games early in the season where he was in the midfield for 80% of centre bounces, but it's mostly been around the 65% mark, since then. The last 2 weeks he's been down at 29% and 21% and playing mostly at half-back. Given the team we've selected, and obviously this is subject to final teams, with Caldwell, Parrish, Durham, Sharp, Setterfield, Roby, Merritt all in there, to run McGrath through, you're pushing a midfielder into another role, which they're not suited to. So I think we're almost forced to play McGrath in the back half. Liam Ryan's kicked 22 goals this season. He's their leading goal kicker. Higgins has kicked 18 in 9 matches. So they've got a couple of really dangerous small forwards there. I think McGrath and in all, well, my hope is Sardal Hooley will have their hands full there. I do think we'll see Nasiah at half-back for most of the game. As you know, I'm not a big fan of playing a forward in a tagging role. I think it gets in the way of team defence doing that and creates holes elsewhere. So I think you need to have everyone buying into that defensive setup and defensive structure. He's their number one for handball receive. So it's that link-up work that you really need to be mindful of restricting. And that's easier said than done, given his pace and his agility. I think physicality is important, but also your mids and wingers pressing up and closing space, also making sure that we're not giving them easy looks through shallow entries. Also, we're in a different situation to the Western Bulldogs, but Luke Beveridge was asked why they didn't tag him in their game against him a couple of weeks ago. You read out his numbers, Hume. And his comments were to the effect of, well, he doesn't really hurt you getting the ball where he's getting it. So they were sort of happy to sacrifice him getting lots of possessions if it was, deeper in their defensive 50. So, again, we need to be able to get those deep entries to be comfortable in allowing that to happen. But I kind of, this is going to hurt saying it, but lean towards agreeing with the Luke Beveridge approach on this one, as long as we can, make sure that we're not exposing ourselves through shallow entries and that we've got a good setup behind the footy.
Yeah. Just sort of going back to what we talked about right at the top of the show and what we've talked about all year, it's been clear that if we're going to be competitive in game, we at least have to match our opponents in the clearance. So we showed some examples of where our clearance game fell apart against North. How do we get our clearance game going, given its importance to the way we play and considering the fact that the Saints have been really strong in this area around the ground in particular?
Yeah, it's a question that we haven't been able to answer all season, but we're playing an opposition that's ranked 4th for clearance differential, 7th for first possession differential. And I don't think they lose much in that area with TDK not playing. I think they lose a bit more around the ground, but Marshall's their number one this season for first possession, second behind Garcia for stoppage clearance, and has had double the number of centre clearances over TDK despite attending a lot less centre bounces. So, I think that they're still as big a clearance and stoppage threat, without TDK as they would have been if he was playing. I think we really just need to nail the start, don't we? Like the best first quarter team against the worst. We can't afford to let them blow this game out, particularly given they're coming off the bye where, historically teams have started games a little bit slowly. Last week, Parrish, I thought, had our cleanest hands in and around the contest. He started on the bench. Roby looked the most dangerous when he went in there late in the game. And midfield is Caldwell's best and I think only position really. I'd probably be sending him to Garcia and asking him to defend their best clearance mid and just focus on getting that start right with a mix like that and build it out from there. And I think if we can get some confidence into the game early by starting well, then hopefully that has a flow-on impact on the rest of the mids as they rotate through.
Yes, and another thing that concerns me heading to this game is that we've been torn apart by opposition halfbacks this year, and the Saints in particular. I think in the games that we've lost to them, it's been their halfbacks that's really done a lot of that damage to us. And even with Jack Sinclair out, they still have the potential to hurt us here. So how can we avoid a similar fate this week?
You've sort of touched on this a little bit already when we're talking about Wanganeen Malira, but again, I think a lot of this is about how we go inside 50. St Kilda concede the fourth most forward 50 ground balls, which only makes me more frustrated that our best forward 50 ground ball winner's not playing. But they also concede the 13th most marks inside 50, whilst being ranked 14th for intercept marks themselves. So behind the footy, they don't really possess the tools to do a lot of damage in terms of winning the ball back. But we need to make sure that we keep our forward line dynamic. We make the ground big for that reason. It's part of the reason I want to see Mackay back. I know Ben's sort of converted some opportunities, taken some marks in one-on-one contests, but I don't think he offers us a lot structurally. I'd be inclined to give Jones another week in the forward line because we know he will spread. We know he adds some pressure as well, help make the ground big. And then they're below AFL average for D50 to forward 50 transition. So I think if we can limit those shallow entries, then we limit the number of opportunities they're going to get to slingshot.
Yeah. And then another thing we touched on earlier was the fact that we've seen so many different positional changes these past couple of weeks. So I guess get the magnets out. What are the ones you want to see this week that you think will give us the best chance of success?
Yeah, look, just simplify things, mate. Get blokes back to their best positions. Caldwell in the midfield, Merritt, forward mid, Dersma wing, Durham, I think more half forward mix. I think he can be really dangerous there. Dave Wicks forward line as well, particularly given it's really only Kako in that forward line as a ground ball winner. So I think we need Durham, Dave Wicks and Merritt playing there more to help out and support in that area. Mackay and Reid back. So, yeah, just settle it down. Focus on the fundamentals. What Solly's doing in that regard, I think, is the absolute right thing to be doing. Let's just not confuse things by having to teach players new roles at the same time they're trying to learn from a new coach. Let's just keep it really simple.
Yeah. Well, look, final thoughts, Jono, and yeah, I'm not usually this down doing these shows, but as you can probably tell from my voice, even me and my eternal optimism is starting to be worn down by the season we're having. So, look, you've been out of the country, you've been brightened up by some sunshine. Give me something to be hopeful about for this Sunday.
Yeah, it didn't do much for my tan, but look, I get it, mate. I understand why you're feeling flat and why most Essendon supporters are feeling that way. It's been tough. We've been through a lot as a fan base over a lot of years, and every time we feel like we're seeing a little bit of hope, where it feels like it's almost the Sideshow Bob scene,
Stepping
isn't it, where he kept stepping on the rakes. Yeah, you think you've escaped it and you step on another one. So I get it. But yeah, look, I think we got most players back into their best positions to finish the game last week, and we finished the game pretty strongly. I know that doesn't count for a lot, and North are a team that haven't really been finishing games, all that well at various times. So look, at least we finished with some momentum. We take that into the game this week against a team that has a couple of areas that I think we can expose, a team also without some key players playing. So I think there's a blueprint there to beat them. Kako, I would hope, is better for the run last week. So let's hope we see more of him at his best and teaming up with Caddy, who continues to show some good form. And yeah, I guess the chance and the hope is always there, mate. I don't think the Saints are going that well. And yeah, we finished last week strongly. So I think that's the message that I would hope Dean Solomon would be giving to his young players, is that, there were some fundamentals that improved in the last quarter last week. Let's take that into quarter one this week and see how we go.
Yeah, fingers crossed, mate. You've done it. You've picked me up. I'm ready to go. I'll be going there with high hopes. I won't blame you if they don't come to fruition, but hopefully everyone else is able to get down there on Sunday, and yeah, hopefully we can start to see some improvement there. A big thanks to you this week. I know it's been a draining week for you coming back from overseas, and you've had a lot of work to catch up on, and a big project to get through at work. So that the fact you've been able to come on tonight and put in some of your high standard of work as usual, I really appreciate that, and I'm sure the listeners do as well. Any final words from you?
No, good to be back, mate. Good to be back talking footy with you, despite how you're feeling at the moment about things, mate. Yeah, great work again by Josh filling in the last couple of weeks. Thank you to him for doing so. But it's good to be back. I can't wait to get to Marvel, pick up Dad and take him to the footy. He hasn't been to a game for a while either. So yeah, looking forward to that and seeing some friendly faces pre-game as well, mate. It's always good fun to see some fellow Essendon fans that we're in the trenches with and catch up with yourselves. So yeah, thank you for your patience as I was getting myself organised today, mate. We started recording a little bit later than usual, but it's good to be back.
Indeed, mate. Well, look, that'll do us for this evening. As always, stay safe and go Dons.